He came to Vietnam with a clipboard, a doctrine, and a chest full of medals. Colonel Howard Lancaster, West Point graduate, decorated commander, veteran of both LRRP and AirCav, had read every page of every manual the Pentagon had ever produced. To him, war was a function. E equals M times R. Effectiveness equals machinery times routine. He believed in steel and system. He believed in firepower, logistics, and overwhelming numbers. And most of all, he believed in control. From the air, Vietnam looked like something conquerable, a theater of operations where war could be waged cleanly in zones, in phases, on schedule. But that illusion dissolved quickly in the field, especially when the field wasn't a field at all, but a thick, rotting jungle where even helicopters hesitated to hover. In 1969, Colonel Lancaster requested a short-term observation tour with Allied recon elements. He wanted to see how other nations operated, particularly the Australians, who were rumored to do things differently in Phuoc Tuy province. What he expected were second-rate scouts with British accents. What he got was a crack in his entire worldview. The day he arrived at Nui Dat, the Australian base, he stood in front of a small hangar with his boots polished, his sidearms snug, and his orders crisp in a manila folder. He was met by an RAAF transport officer who simply said, quote, "0, no motorcade, no radio net, no briefing room, just trees." He walked toward the jungle and saw them. 5 men, dirty, silent. One of them had sawed the barrel of his L1A1 rifle nearly in half. Another carried no visible radio. No helmet, no rank. They didn't salute. They didn't speak. One of them just pointed and began walking. Quote 1, the colonel asked, expecting at least a field RTO or a support team trailing behind. Quote. The tallest one said, without slowing down. There were no words for what Lancaster felt in that moment, only a brief pause in his stride. He'd come expecting a demonstration of Allied support. What he got instead was the beginning of a 4-day patrol that would challenge everything he thought he understood about war, survival, and the meaning of efficiency. And so, clipboard in hand, boots still too clean, the colonel followed 5 ghosts into the bush, where there would be no maps, no radios, and no rescue plan. Just instinct, silence, and a quiet war fought on invisible terms. Colonel Howard Lancaster was no fool. He wasn't some desk-bound theorist pretending to know war. He had served with the long-range reconnaissance patrols in Germany and had flown as an observer with the air cavalry in the early days of Vietnam. He'd tasted combat. He had lost men. But he still believed war could be systematized, broken down into predictable outcomes like engineering. He didn't dismiss jungle warfare. He just believed it could be optimized. The Australians, to him, were peculiar. Brave, professional, but not scalable. They operated in small patrols, relied on instinct and improvisation. To Lancaster, they were relics of a past war, more akin to scouts from the Boer War than participants in a modern military campaign. Their lack of radios, their minimalist loadouts, their refusal to use helicopters unless absolutely necessary. All of it, in his view, was proof of tactical underdevelopment. Before he joined the SAS patrol, he had voiced it bluntly at a U.S. liaison briefing in Long Bin. Quote 3. Someone in the room had chuckled and said, quote, "Off." He didn't laugh. Lancaster respected hierarchy, structure, and predictability. He believed in command and control. The idea that 5 men could disappear into enemy territory without air support, artillery fallback, or even a proper medevac plan, that wasn't courage. That was risk. And so, when he saw them for the first time, 5 Australians covered in mud, stripped of insignia, no helmets, carrying only what they needed, he catalogued it not as innovation, but as a gamble. His mind calculated risk percentages, their odds of survival, the lack of a forward operating net. They didn't even wear proper webbing, just strips of canvas and tape. One of them had boots cut open for drainage. Another had no spare ammunition visible. To Lancaster, it felt reckless. To the SAS patrol, it was freedom. But that difference in mindset wouldn't become clear until much later. For now, he kept his thoughts to himself. He was here to observe, not to command. Yet even as he followed them deeper into the tree line, part of him still believed he would be vindicated. Not out of malice, but out of certainty that systems beat chaos every time. They didn't look like elite soldiers. 5 men, unshaven, faces streaked with camo, sweat, and dirt. Shirts unbuttoned, sleeves rolled, green tape wrapped around boots and weapons. One of them had sawed off half his L1A1 barrel, as if mocking the sacred geometry of standard-issue doctrine. Another walked barefoot for the first 100 meters, only putting his boots back on once the jungle swallowed the last trace of the base behind them. To Colonel Lancaster, it was the strangest team he had ever encountered. No one barked orders. No one walked point for long. They simply moved, one shadow bleeding into the next. And still, he kept looking around, waiting for the rest of the unit. After 10 minutes of walking, he finally asked, "So, where's your RTO, your fire support team?" The lead scout, a man named Wills, lean and quiet, with a voice like dry leaves, turned his head just slightly and said, "You're looking at it, sir." Lancaster blinked. No radio, no support. He glanced again at the weapons. One L1A1 had its wooden stock wrapped in rubber bands. Another man carried an Owen submachine gun from World War II. No grenades hung from their belts, no spare gear, no maps he could see. Just 5 men. And the jungle. He noted it all mentally. No comms, no QRF, no backup, no logistics tail. His doctrine screamed. His training told him this was suicide. But these men didn't walk like they were improvising. They moved like they had already rehearsed this route in their minds. Like the jungle was their home, and he was the guest. An awkward, well-fed intruder dragging behind with clean boots and a confused look. And still, not one of them explained anything. No briefing, no orientation phase. Just the next step forward, and the next, and the next. By midday, Lancaster was drenched in sweat. His socks were soaked. His pack weighed heavier with every vine he pushed through. The Australians, meanwhile, hadn't broken rhythm. They walked like machines, but not mechanical, predatory, like things built for this environment. At one point, Lancaster tried to assert some control. "Do we have a fallback position marked?" Silence. Then Wills. "Fallbacks are for when you're seen, sir." It wasn't arrogance. It was something deeper, a kind of disdain for the entire premise of being rescued, as if requiring help meant you'd already failed the mission. That was when it hit him, not as a thought, but as a feeling. These men didn't operate around the jungle. They became it. And for the first time since arriving in Vietnam, Colonel Lancaster felt like the outsider, not the commander, not the expert, just a man with too much gear, too many questions, and a long walk ahead. By the second day, the jungle was inside his clothes, inside his lungs, inside his bones. Colonel Lancaster had long since stopped checking his watch. Time in the bush wasn't measured in hours. It was measured in heartbeats between sounds, in the weight of sweat soaking into your pack, in the way your legs began to shake, not from fear, but from exhaustion disguised as rhythm. The Australians didn't talk, not once. No whispered orders, no quote, 9. Everything was hands, barely even gestures, just fingers pointing, palms raised, a flick of the head. And somehow, it all worked. Lancaster tried to keep up, but his breathing betrayed him. He was loud. Not in volume, but in presence. The kind of loud that animals can hear before you even realize you're out of place. The patrol walked single file, spaced, spread. No man within arm's reach of the next. No footprints repeated. The path they cut might as well have been invisible. And then, it happened. They paused in a grove. Silent. No birds. No wind. Lancaster leaned against a tree, chest heaving. Mosquitoes danced around his ears, feasting. He swatted them without thinking. One of the Australians, a wiry soldier with coal-black face paint and eyes like stone, turned slowly and stared at him. Not angry, just disappointed. That moment stung more than any reprimand he'd received in his career. Lancaster's boots were squelching. His gear was clunky. The radio in his pack, standard issue, kept shifting with each step, snagging branches, metal clicking against metal. The Australians? Nothing. Even their rifles were quiet. No rattle, no sway. Just extensions of the arm, like spears or claws. He had been trained to survive the jungle. They had adapted to it. At one point, he slipped on a root, just a minor stumble. But the team halted as if someone had fired a shot. No one helped him up. No one said a word. The message was clear. You're a liability now. The silence taught more than any lecture could. It was brutal, humbling, and effective. In the world Lancaster came from, soldiers were praised for clarity of voice, speed of command. In this world, sound was a warning. Noise was death. He started to notice what they noticed. The broken fern that hadn't browned yet. The shift in insect patterns. The drop in air pressure. The way birds fell silent before the enemy ever arrived. One of the men plucked a leaf off a bush, crushed it gently in his fingers, then nodded. No explanation. Just movement. Lancaster followed, now more carefully, trying to become smaller, less present. The jungle was no longer background. It was the battlefield, the teacher, the mirror. And it didn't care about rank. By the third day, Colonel Lancaster had stopped trying to understand the route. They never consulted a map, never paused to triangulate or reference a grid. The jungle itself, its patterns, its silences, its smells, was their compass. At first, Lancaster thought it was arrogance. Now, he wasn't so sure. It began with the birds. One moment, the jungle hummed with life. Cicadas, rustling leaves, distant parrot calls. The next moment, nothing. A silence, not of peace, but of absence. Like something had walked into the forest, and all other things had slipped away to make room. The patrol froze. No words. Just stillness. Wills, the patrol leader, slowly raised one finger, then pointed to the canopy above. His nostrils flared slightly. That was the only movement. Lancaster strained his senses. He heard nothing unusual, saw nothing. Then he caught it, faint and sour, almost drowned by earth and rot. Cigarette smoke. Someone nearby. Upwind, careless, nervous. Wills didn't react with panic. No radio call. No hand signal for an attack. Instead, he turned and silently directed the team into a wide arc, circling toward higher ground. No noise. No rush. Like a pack of predators moving not to fight, but to understand. Lancaster followed, bewildered. In his training, contact meant action. Fix the enemy, call in air support, coordinate artillery, engage. But the Australians weren't hunting a firefight. They were watching a mistake unfold. As they crept closer, Lancaster caught glimpses. Shadowed shapes in green uniforms, movement, weapons. A small NVA unit, maybe 6 or 7, gathered near a game trail. Talking, smoking, relaxed. The Australians didn't speak. They melted into the bush, one up a tree, another behind a root cluster. Lancaster blinked, and they were gone. He turned, expecting orders. None came. Just a quiet glance from Wills, who raised 3 fingers, then tapped his wrist. 3 minutes. Wait. Lancaster's pulse quickened. Back in Long Bin, this situation would have triggered an entire chain of response. Coordinates, support requests, grid references. Here, just silence and patience. And then, just as suddenly, the Australians moved away. Not toward the enemy, around them, wide and slow. Not because they were afraid, but because they didn't need the kill. That wasn't the mission. The cigarette had been the warning, not the opportunity. Back at a safe distance, Wills finally spoke. They weren't looking for us. No need to let them know we're here. Lancaster nodded, but part of him recoiled. So much training, so much doctrine telling him to dominate terrain, not avoid it. Yet what he had just seen was control of a higher order. The kind that left no bodies, no tracks, no bullet casings. Only confusion, only fear, only questions they never announced were coming. There were no orders, no countdown, no plan laid out in front of Colonel Lancaster. Just a change in rhythm, barely perceptible, like the jungle holding its breath. It began with a subtle tilt of a head, a pause in step. A glance passed from man to man, faster than a whisper. That was it. That was the signal. The patrol dissolved into the undergrowth. Lancaster crouched low, unsure of what had triggered it. He had heard nothing, seen nothing, but the Australians had vanished. One moment they were beside him. The next, they were shadows among branches and vines. Seconds ticked. Then came the strike. 3 shots, precise, spaced, final. Not a burst, not a panic spray, just the cold punctuation of skill. Each shot a decision. Each target already studied, assessed, and erased. No yelling, no celebration, no chaos. Just silence returning like a curtain being drawn back over the stage. Lancaster stayed still, stunned. His training had prepared him for firefights, for the crackle of radios, the roar of gunships, the scream of artillery, a war of noise and force. But this wasn't war. It was removal. The SAS didn't fight. They deleted. 15 seconds after the first shot, the patrol reappeared. One by one. Calm. Breathing steady. Not a word spoken. Wills knelt by one of the bodies. An NVA point man who'd wandered too close to the edge of a dry creek. He checked the weapon, then covered the body with a few leaves. No looting, no trophies, just disappearance. Lancaster stepped forward, still unsure what to say. Quote 11, he asked. Wills didn't look up. No need, he replied. They won't find the rest of the squad now. We just bought time for someone else. Lancaster blinked. It hadn't even been their mission. The patrol hadn't been hunting that unit. They'd just acted, precisely, quietly, to neutralize a threat that could have compromised another team days later. No request for approval. No paperwork trail. No kill confirmation needed. No drama. Only intent. Lancaster looked back at the path they came from. The jungle had already begun reclaiming the scene. Leaves shifted. Wind blew. The footprints were fading. The men were already moving again. And just like that, the war continued. Not in explosions, not in numbers, but in silent disruptions, surgical and invisible. By the time the colonel raised his radio to report what he had seen, there was nothing left to report. The battle had ended before it began. On the final morning of the patrol, the jungle had softened just a little. The rain had held off, the light broke through in muted shafts, and for the first time in days, Colonel Lancaster felt like he could finally breathe. They were heading toward a ridgeline, silent as ever, formation unchanged. The mission, whatever it was, seemed done. No one explained it. No one needed to. There were no debriefs in this world, just the sense that the work was complete. Lancaster had been holding a question in his chest since the day they left Nui Dat. It finally slipped out. It was a simple inquiry, standard protocol. In his world, no patrol was complete without an exit strategy. Chopper coordinates, fallback zones, secondary rally points, artillery coverage. The plan was the spine of the operation. Wills didn't stop walking. He didn't even look back. Quote, 15, he said, flatly. Quote, 16. Lancaster stopped in place. We walk. It didn't sound like arrogance. It wasn't bravado. It was policy, doctrine, philosophy. In 4 words, Wills had dismantled half of what Lancaster believed a modern army required to function. They didn't trust extraction. They didn't count on air support. No medevac, no artillery umbrella, no QRF waiting to swoop in. To the SAS, those things weren't safety nets. They were weak points, dependencies, crutches, things that made you louder, slower, more visible. To Lancaster, this was unthinkable. But looking at the 5 men in front of him, packs light, eyes alert, bodies lean with movement and precision, he realized something. They weren't prepared to be rescued. They were prepared never to need it. There was no quote 17 in their vocabulary. Just don't be seen, don't be heard, don't be found. Lancaster had spent his career building systems that assumed failure was always around the corner, that safety came from layered support and constant communication. The SAS had done the opposite. They had turned survival into a personal responsibility, not a command structure. For them, every ounce of gear was a choice. Every sound was a liability. Every step had to justify itself. And suddenly, Lancaster understood why they carried no radios, why their rifles looked butchered, Why their eyes never stopped scanning. These weren't just soldiers. They were escape plans with skin. They didn't just patrol. They vanished. Later, back at the perimeter of Nui Dat, a truck would be waiting to take the colonel back to Long Bin. Wills and the others wouldn't ride. They'd just disappear into the scrub, another mission already in motion. Lancaster climbed into the back of the vehicle, silent. His boots were torn. His sidearm was rusted with sweat. His map was useless. He looked one last time at the tree line, but there was nothing there. They were already gone. The drive back to Long Bin felt longer than the patrol. The truck rumbled along the laterite road, kicking up red dust that coated everything. His boots, his skin, the creases of his notebook. Colonel Lancaster sat in silence, arms resting on his knees, watching the jungle recede in the side mirror like a fading ghost. When he arrived back at the U.S. headquarters, it was as if the war had reset. The chaos of clipboards, shouted orders, incoming radio chatter, and the smell of hot coffee and diesel fuel greeted him like an old friend. The maps were still pinned on the walls, arrows drawn in bold colors, zones, objectives, kill boxes. But something in him had shifted. He stood in front of the big war map, the one every officer passed at least a dozen times a day, and just stared. It was covered in pins and lines and coded symbols, routes marked in red, helicopter landing zones in blue, artillery coverage in green. It all looked clean. Too clean. He looked for Phuoc Tui Province, the area they had patrolled. It was marked with a few thin arrows, a company boundary, and a label. Low activity, limited contact. He nearly laughed. What he had seen in those forests wasn't low activity. It was a different kind of war altogether. One without icons. One that wouldn't fit on any map. A war of shadows, where impact left no footprint. Where a 5-man team could change the fate of a whole district and vanish without leaving a radio log behind. A young lieutenant walked past and said, "Sir, need a debrief written?" Lancaster didn't answer. He kept staring at the wall. Later that night he sat at his desk. The form was blank in front of him. The after-action report section asked for standard metrics. Enemy strength encountered. Casualties inflicted. Friendly force losses. Ammunition expended. Lessons learned. He filled in only one section. Under quote 19 he wrote, quote 20. He stopped writing. Looked down at his boots, still caked in jungle mud. Then he looked at his sidearm on the desk. He hadn't drawn it once during the entire patrol. Before lights out he whispered something aloud, to no one in particular. We trained to win with firepower. They win by never being seen.